Now back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm Dr. Rita Louise, and you're listening to Just Energy Radio. Just Energy Radio is brought to you by SoulHealer.com and the Institute of Applied Energetics. That's www.appliedergeticsinstitute.com. And today we're in the second hour of talking with Micah Hanks about his book, Magic, Mysticism, and the Molecule. His webpage is GraliantReport.com. Micah, there was a question in the chat room at the very beginning of the hour, so I hope I don't distract you from where we left off before. And they wondered what Gralient meant.
Well, I get that quite a lot. And, I think for me, I like to point out that with regards, because I've become known, I think, primarily as a ufologist with my research. When I started really trying to get myself out there, I've written a few articles in different magazines and things like that, but really these days, if you want to be able to create a platform in any field, you really have to have a good web presence. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to have a rich content website that would feature a lot of, articles. And now, today, really, although there are a lot of articles at GraliantReport.com, you'll find, of course, weekly podcasts that, as a matter of fact, every Tuesday I do a 3-hour web radio program, and then that's uploaded as a podcast, usually that night or the following morning. And so there's a lot of different kind of content there. And when I started out, I wasn't, I don't think, quite as synonymous in terms of, the use of my name with the UFO community. And nonetheless, maybe kind of as a a preemptive kind of a thing, because I didn't intend it quite that way at the time. It just kind of fell together. Gralien was the word I created, it's a portmanteau. I threw two words together. We hear these references to gray aliens in the UFO abductee literature, and so I thought at the time it would be kind of funny, and it would also be a word that you could use that was singular. Nobody else was using it at the time, and it would have kind of that singular appeal. In other words, if I used a word that was actually a combination of two and that no one else was using in different areas, that would be something that people would be able to kind of associate directly with me and my work. So I thought Gralient Report would be good. That's where the name came from. And I think maybe as a result of that indirect allusion to abduction lore, people probably started to look to my work as being kind of UFO-centric. And before long, UFO Magazine contacted me. And a lot of these people, they would contact me and ask me to write articles or columns for their magazines and everything. And although they would be kind of, again, UFO-oriented publications, I think people have always enjoyed about me the fact that they are not going to get just one take on something, and they're not going to be, in a situation where if they ask me about UFOs, that I won't turn right around and talk about cryptozoology or ghosts and hauntings and psychic phenomena. I really think that the best description for what I do is, I'm not just a person who collects stories of the unexplained, and hence by that jurisdiction I'm a Fortean or Fortean researcher. But I think that I'm also someone who, in a very philosophical way, tries to ask questions about these sorts of things. I gather the information and I'll report that, but I also try and ask questions and make a certain kind of determinations based on logical inquiry. So you might say that although Gralient Report seems to kind of refer to UFOs and things, I'm really kind of a Fortean epistemologist.
You're just a well-rounded kind of guy.
Maybe it's just that I'm
That's probably why we get along so good, because we can just go everywhere and keep track of what the other person's saying. It's like, yeah, but what about this? Okay, so back to where I left off before the break, and I kind of brought up about the ancient traditions, but what have you found in your research, between more current practices and ancient practices and these non-dimensional beings?
I think in terms of there being, it's kind of a difficult thing to quantify. I'm going to go ahead and jump into it and try to, because actually the way that you worded that question is really kind of fundamental to the concept I'm floating in the book. there isn't, in my opinion, much difference between, for instance, what we were talking about in the last segment, ancient rituals or practices that were aimed at maybe contacting other intelligences, you know. And you mentioned there being guidebooks, in a sense, having been written of those. I mean, and for those who might not understand exactly what you or I mean by that, a good example would be the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, or sometimes referred to as the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which outlines a lot of unique processes and a lot of unique things about not only the afterlife, but also the period before physicality, when a spirit is supposed to be entering a body. The Tibetan Book of the Dead actually describes there being a point, a certain number of days, within proximity of the, of conception, and then, of course, the formation of the beginnings of the little cluster of cells that eventually becomes a fetus, and then, of course, grows and develops within the mother's womb into a human. There's this concept that at some point in that progression from the beginning, conception to birth, that a soul, according to many religious traditions, enters that body. In the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and I talk about this in my book, they discuss an exact time when that is supposed to occur. And interestingly, modern, medical science and study of the human anatomy, and also a certain degree modern pharmacology, have helped determine that in coincidence with some of those processes that occur spiritually, according to the Tibetan Book of the Dead, we also see the beginnings of pretty revelatory things in the human physiology. For instance, this is the same point at which the pineal gland begins to appear in the fetus, the beginnings of this, of course, what Descartes called the seat of the soul, and much later, Dr. Rick Strassman has hypothesized the pineal gland to be a literal point within the human body from which a lot of our mystical experiences may stem. And he thinks that in terms of the pharmacology behind that, the substances, the chemicals underlying mystical processes may actually involve dimethyltryptamine, which is a very powerful tryptamine, of course, as I said. And it's, of course, DMT is very enigmatic and strange to me. Although it's a powerful hallucinogen, it is present in our bodies and produced in our bodies, and it's a close chemical cousin to other tryptamines like serotonin and melatonin, of course, which governs not only our sleep but also, to a certain extent, our sex drive. DMT, as a result of being highly hallucinogenic, especially when introduced in certain ways from the external world, it is renowned for being so potent that it is outlawed. Of course, it's one of these drugs that is, people can obtain it, and they obviously do because we hear stories like this. And in DMT studies that were performed by Dr. Rick Strassman back in the 1990s, it was DEA approved, so they were able to get laboratory quality synthesized DMT, and they were able to utilize that legally in those studies. But otherwise, it's illegal to obtain. You see why I think that that's funny. DMT is illegal because of its potential hallucinatory properties, and yet it is produced, as we understand, in the human body. That much we do know. What we don't know is where precisely the DMT comes from, and that, as I understand, a lot of people will tell you straight up it's the pineal gland, but Dr. Rick Strassman, I believe, has speculated that that's the case, and although that is entirely likely, I don't know of present studies that have confirmed without a doubt that is the origin of DMT that is found in the bloodstream. Sometimes, interestingly, in slightly higher levels after death. In other words, after a person has actually passed from this world and the physical body dies, blood taken at the time or shortly after the time of death shows a slightly increased amount of dimethyltryptamine sometimes present in the bloodstream. So, again, this all kind of has led Dr. Strassman and a few other pharmacologists and others who study the effects of hallucinogens on the mind to believe that not only could certain mystical experiences be caused by what they call endogenous release of these substances into the body, but also that these things could be behind the expressions, or the visions expressed by those on their deathbeds, seeing angels and angelic beings and other, spiritual visions, and also the near-death experience itself. That's one of many theories. There are a lot of different hypotheses as to what could cause these sorts of things, though another compound that's produced in the body that could underlie some of these sorts of circumstances would be adrenochrome, Some people say it's as simple as, varying, fluctuations in the level of oxygen in the bloodstream at various times, especially, when someone's going into shock or if they've sustained an injury or if they're in the process of dying. So a lot of these chemical processes in the body could govern and could have those kinds of effects in terms of what in, since ancient times we've called mystical experiences. And it's interesting that there are those parallels between some of these, as you'd said, quote-unquote, guidebooks, whether it be the Tibetan Book of the Dead. We could look at the Hebrew Book of Formation, which describes the creation of golems in the Jewish mythology. Even the Christian Bible describes a number of rather interesting and revelatory things that, in terms of, the ecstatic visions and those kinds of things that were described, I believe, in some of the Gospels and things like that. These could be very well like to mystical experiences or even hallucinogenic drug trips that is described, especially since the 1960s, and the liberation of those kinds of ideas and experimentation on those grounds. All that to say that indeed maybe in ancient times people were trying to utilize what again I call spiritual sciences through the use of, as the book title itself entails, magical practices, mystical processes, meditations and things like that, or maybe even the full-on introduction of hallucinogenic molecules and things like that into our bodies for purposes of establishing some sort of extra-dimensional contact with another intelligence. They may have been doing that in ancient times, and although we would poo-poo the idea today, it's not that different from, our attempts at contacting extraterrestrials using SETI, using radio or things like that. I just think that radio is probably a lot less effective than the use of substances and mystical practices and processes and things like that. In a sense, maybe the ancients were really onto something that we today, as a result of our kind of scientific snobbery, have kind of cut ourselves off from. And they very well may have harnessed, in a sense, certain kinds of technologies for use in communication and expanding the mind that we literally have kept ourselves conveniently hidden from in the modern era.
Many people believe that when you take hallucinogenics, that it just opens us up to our inner world versus opening us up to being able to see, envision, interact with the unseen reality. Where do you fall on that line?
Well, Rita, I'm kind of in the middle, to be honest with you. Not to be aggravating, but
no, that's okay.
I think that there are obviously instances where you can take a hallucinatory drug and something of meaning. You may still have a mystical experience, okay? Let me point that out. But what is occurring is the chemical effect on the human mind and perception causes maybe allows it as a catalyst for a reconciliation in a sense, or maybe coming to terms with something that has been troubling an individual, and something within the mind can take place, and a person can probably still have a meaningful experience as a result of hallucinogens or the introduction of stimuli along those lines into the body, and it wouldn't necessarily have to be contact with another realm. So I definitely think that some people, first of all, who are utilizing drugs just for recreational purposes are, in all likelihood, they're tapping into inner, maybe not wisdom, but things, within their own mind that may have little or no actual effect in terms of bettering them or, let alone, contacting some interdimensional intelligence, anything like that. I definitely think a lot of it comes from the mind. There could still be merit to these experiences if it all entirely stems from the mind, as long as it's something that is conducive to growing and bettering the individual, as has been found in some of the studies at Johns Hopkins University with psilocybin, which is the active ingredient in magic mushrooms. And of course, they've found that people who have been administered psilocybin, again, you got to keep in mind, under the right setting. A person who decides just to, consume, whatever substance A is, and then run around in the woods or go out with their friends, they may have a terrible experience because, again, the setting and the circumstances are not very carefully controlled. But in scientific studies where these kinds of substances are administered, often set and setting, these sorts of a kind of general care for maintaining a healthy, happy, and just a fruitful environment for the experience tend to work very well in ensuring that an individual will have that kind of experience from which they grow in in the introduction of these sorts of substances to the body. And in these experiments at Johns Hopkins with psilocybin and the like, there are a number of instances where people have said that for months after the initial, what you would call, again, for lack of a better term, a mystical experience, there are many people who have said that the ongoing good effects, the benefits, mentally and otherwise, on their outlook of life and their enjoyment of life, their sense of purpose, these sorts of things, it grows and it's plentiful, and it remains as such for months or maybe years after the fact. So in that sense, these things probably indeed are all occurring within the mind, whereas certain varieties of hallucinogens, especially dimethyltryptamine, not in every instance, but in some instances, do call into question what appear to be encounters, in a sort of psychic environment with entities, with intelligences. That, for all we know, could stem from the mind also. But what I think is interesting, especially with regard to DMT research, is the consistency of certain types of presences that tend to appear. We hear about these mantis-like beings. We hear about the light beings and stick figures, and strangely, we hear a lot about clowns that appear during people's various experiences under the influence of dimethyltryptamine. Clearly, these could be one of two things. They could actually be some sort of strange presences that become available to or accessible to humans who are under the influence of DMT or something similar under certain controlled circumstances. Alternatively, they could be, as Carl Jung might have called them, archetypes that exist within the mind that bear some sort of a symbolic importance to humans, and that they kind of exist within our own subconscious, and that whatever these chemical agents are actually doing, they're tapping into these sort of substrata, these layers within the human subconscious, and they're bringing these things to the forefront, and that too could explain the consistency between these experiences. It's all open to interpretation, and I think that, again, the science-minded people in the medical community are going to be very quick to say that it all comes from the mind and that there's very little benefit to these sorts of things. That may or may not be the case, but that does not mean that we shouldn't always proceed with caution in any event when it comes to these kinds of things. And therefore, I do want to say that although I've kind of made myself an expert on the various effects that these kinds of substances can have on the human mind and physiology, I am not a user of these kinds of substances myself.
That was my next question.
A lot of people ask that, but I, as a matter of fact, have never used these. As a researcher, I've been interested in the claims of others, but I'm not a psychonaut. I'm not a person who claims to have traveled to other planets, under the influence of drugs. I've never done it. Not to say maybe under the right circumstances, if it were controlled properly, that I wouldn't, but I haven't ever made plans to do it, and at present I don't have plans to do it. As a journalist, I'm interested in these kind of things. And two, I also have to say that as a result of the way I've approached it journalistically, looking for the patterns and the associations that can be made between fields of knowledge that have been built around this sort of study over the years, I can say that there's a lot of danger associated with it, and I can't recommend people run out and try and take drugs and think they're going to meet aliens. That can be very, very dangerous. So, again, looking at this in terms of the associations that can be made between ancient practices, mysticism, magical processes, and spiritual experiences, mystical experiences, and then what the claims of those who have been under the influence of drugs at various times have said. There's clearly a consistency there. That's why I'm looking at all this, and that in itself is very interesting to me.
It just makes me think, listening to you talk about Carlos Castaneda. Are you familiar with Carlos Castaneda?
Oh, yeah.
In his book, The Separate Reality, it's just, Don Juan's just like feeding him all these drugs, and he's and he's tripping out and having like these bugs become giant size, and and in the 70s that was like kind of a cool thing. Hey, let's read these drug books, so.
Yeah.
But then it got into the more spiritual part, and and actually I didn't even read that book first. That was the very last one I read, and I was actually kind of disappointed with it. But Don Juan's methodology, which was very interesting and fits in with what you're talking about now, was he gave Carlos all of those drugs to expand his perception of reality, so that when he was having a mystical experience in waking consciousness, he could accept it.
Yes, exactly. And see, that's what's so terrible to me. I think that there's a book by Eric Schlosser called Reefer Madness that kind of talks about the history of the 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 use of marijuana in this country, and more specifically the history of how marijuana essentially was demonized, especially in the early half of the last century. Although I'm not a user, as I've pointed out, I am a person who, I think in a regulated and controlled way, do believe that drugs should be, a lot of drugs, maybe not all drugs, but certain drugs, especially marijuana, should be legalized. When we look at the history of prohibition in the United States, we see exactly what happened when alcohol was made illegal. Alcohol, the legal sale of alcohol, of course, was prohibited, and therefore we handed the sale of alcohol to those who weren't going to allow laws and federal regulations to stand in their way, and therefore power was also handed to the mobs, and to the rum runners, those who were willing to cash in on the illegality, and nonetheless the incredible demand that remained with regard to people's alcohol consumption. People might not have been able to obtain it legally, but by God, that didn't mean that they didn't want it, that they weren't going to get it, and therefore those who were able to supply it illegally benefited. We have that same problem today, I think, with regard to a lot of illicit substances. And while I don't think that all of them need to be just free and available on the streets, I think that we see that there are problems that stem from that. Now, that's kind of the more political angle of things, but there's also a cultural sort of prohibition. This attitude that, certain substances and the effects they have on our minds, well, that's unnatural, and therefore these things should be avoided. And in the 1960s, with the kind of the free love attitudes and things, and of course we had the Kool-Aid experiments. We had Tim Leary and these guys, sitting around with college students, and they were all taking LSD. The introduction of something like lysergic acid diethylamide into the body can be incredibly revelatory, and also incredibly dangerous. But we had, at that point as a society, become so, Pollyanna is a word that comes to mind, and following World War II and, of course, the glistening, polished, wonderful little happy-go-lucky culture of the 1950s, people like to think that the sorts of ideas, and the liberalization of ideas that we have today didn't exist in the 1950s. That simply wasn't the case. It just wasn't as prevalent, and the thing is that nonetheless, when you kind of place restrictions on attitudes and thought and culture, what ends up happening is that when people gain access to certain things, that have been banned or prohibited, they tend to go nuts with it. There's this kind of ill effect that occurs, and I think as a result of that, people didn't know what to do with hallucinogens and things like that in the 1960s, and so as society began to kind of liberalize in terms of approaches and ideas and use of those kinds of things, the hippie generation, as it were, kind of went wild with it, and recreational drug use kind of became the norm. Even though I think initially there were a lot of people who were proponents of utilizing those things, not for just let's go get messed up and have a good time, they realized that there were spiritual potentials that the use of these substances involved and that they could benefit potentially from it. But how many people do you think were regular drug users utilize such things for those purposes? How many people do you think today really think about, well, I'm going to try and better myself and have I'm going to try and have a deep conversation with, a Jungian archetype within my own subconscious under the influence of some substance tonight.
But usually people that are taking drugs, recreational drugs, end up or can end up being a much more spiritual person as a result of the drug use, as opposed to, them using the drugs to get to that spirit, to deepen a spiritual place. And I'm just going to throw in my little piece here. It's like, I think there's, I don't know anyone that's had a spiritual experience on alcohol. Not a one.
Right, good point.
And so I don't get that. But I think this is kind of my opinion, that certain drugs are regulated or not regulated based on where the person is at. It's like alcohol makes people stupid. Pot makes people tired and lazy, and I would rather have a bunch of stoners as opposed to a bunch of tweakers, hanging around, because, the tweakers are going to be like paranoid and hyper and stressed out versus wanting a brownie and the TV, but it's a totally different mentality. But people that are potheads, tend to be more reflective, more introverted. They tend to be more rebel-rousing, because they're in a more retrospective place, and so I think even looking at what altering substance is and what the impact on the physiology is, and you start kind of going, well, what's legal and what's not legal, and where do these things fit in, and what is the government having a war on? You notice there's never like a war on heroin, because that's like a big moneymaker, so.
Yeah, right.
Wait, my phone just went dead. No.
Oh, there it goes. Bound to happen. You found the keyword of the day, Rita. Everybody's screaming.
Oh, man. So with these, I'm going back to the being thing. With these beings, do you think that, what is the impact, or do you think there's an impact on humanity with us having some kind of communication with them? What role do they play?
Well, yeah, that's interesting. Now, I saw an interview, or not an interview, but a segment from the popular radio host Alex Jones, Jones's program. And in this segment, it was funny. It was linked all over the web, and I think we all kind of had a good laugh at it. Alex Jones was going wild talking about what he called he called them clockwork elves. I think he meant fractal elves. Fractal elves being a reference to Terence McKenna and interactions he had with what he called the inhabitants of the DMT space. But Alex Jones has been talking about clockwork elves, and all this crazy stuff that the globalist elites were trying to do. And we all had a good laugh watching Alex just go nuts about this. And yet, to an extent, although I think that, we know that Alex Jones tends to be a little sensational in his approaches, he's not entirely wrong by any means in terms of his belief that, and this is what was stated in the video segment I was referring, he said that DMT is viewed as some kind of a, I don't know about calling it a weapon, but some sort of a powerful medium through which, as he put it, the globalist elites believe they were actually being put directly in contact with intelligent beings from elsewhere. Furthermore, Jones has asserted that virtually every exclusive secret society, dating back to ancient times, has in some way, shape, or form believed that they were in contact with some kind of greater than human intelligence. And he believes that as a result of that, there's a case to be made for films like Prometheus that I mentioned earlier, being directly correlated with an Illuminati agenda. Now, okay, I don't go that far myself. I want to make that clear. But where I say that Jones is correct on certain things is that, again, my research shows that there are various, factions, mostly in obscure pharmacological, circles, that, as well as what you might call, some of the New Age groups and things like that. Terence McKenna, although he was a brilliant ethnobotanist, he was also considered very New Age in his practices and approaches. But these people have indeed seemed to, to open our culture up to the possibility that through not just drug use is only a controlled way, according to certain individuals, that one can elicit an altered state of consciousness in which that state of mind might allow one to have some sort of a connection with something, or maybe just with themselves. That's just one way of accessing it. And again, the reason that the book is called Magic, Mysticism, and the Molecule is because in ancient times, people were utilizing what they called magical processes. They're the mystics of the East, and, of course, the meditative processes that supposedly open the mind, or as Daniel Pinchbeck had called it in his book with the same title, breaking open the head, in ways that open our minds to new possibilities and potentials. And then, of course, the use of entheogenic drugs are kind of like a way to cheat and to get to that state of mind without having to learn the proper meditative processes and things like that. All that to say that, indeed, there are some in circles who will say that achieving that altered state of consciousness, or even maybe just entering that state in a dream, in a kind of lucid dreaming capacity, will allow you a certain limited contact with intelligence, intelligent form. That's why I kind of get into talking about Aleister Crowley in my book a little bit as well. But the more paranoid among us out there would say that, a lot of these individuals, including Crowley, had connections with secret government organizations, individuals, and facilities, and that there is indeed a new world order out there, and that there was, or still is, a group of globalists who literally hope to utilize knowledge gained from intelligences that can be accessible in such ways for the furtherance of a new world order and a secret globalist elitist agenda. The reason I bring all that up is because, again, I don't think that necessarily that's really what's going on, but there are people who perceive that there is power that could be wrought from this intelligence. And whether they do it, they being, some secret government organization, or whether it be a group of enlightened individuals who come together and say, let's better ourselves and help humanity by trying to increase our own understanding of reality through, altering our perception of reality. There are ways, I think, that anyone, for whatever purpose they choose to use that for, could benefit from these kinds of things, and I think that ultimately that's why people seem interested in trying to make contact with, as you'd said, Rita, entities. And again, maybe it's not so simple as there being entities. I think it's really easy for us to assume that we can take some sort of a clandestine, secretive kind of substance, and all of a sudden we're standing there in a room with aliens and we're able to have a spiritual conference with real flesh and blood aliens in an altered state. It may not be so simple as being beings or entities. What do we call intelligence? What kinds of intelligences could exist beyond the confines of what you or I might recognize as being an intelligent, quote-unquote, being? Maybe, since there wouldn't have to be a being there for some intelligent message to still come through and for us to be able to maintain and reap from that some kind of benefit. So there are multiple different levels of, the medium and how it could be achieved, but I think that's the reason that people tend to do it, and therefore the suspicious among us assume that there are probably people who are doing this and for their own personal sick and twisted gain, and hence Alex Jones and some of these of the more conspiracy-minded crowd will tell you that, yes, the very sorts of things I talk about in my book are being utilized solely for the purpose of furthering an elitist agenda. But I haven't seen a whole lot of evidence that is really what's going on.
But wouldn't it be really interesting if it was? I mean, there are so many interesting, weird, I'm going to say conspiracy theory things. Like there's this stuff Alex talks about. Then there's, like the reptilians that, are controlling the Illuminati for their agenda. Then there's like the John Lear stuff that, there's bases on Mars and bases on Moon, and there's a hologram up there. I mean, you listen to them, and there's part of your brain that goes, yeah, right. But then there's another part of your brain that goes, but what if? And the scarier part is that what if this piece is true? Because if reptilians, as an example, are really controlling what's going on through the Illuminati, then how far of a stretch would it be that there are bases hidden on the moon that are hidden by a hologram? And that we never went to the moon, of course, that whole thing.
Well, yeah. I think, our good friend Nick Redfern, in his book, The NASA Conspiracies, addresses a lot of those conspiracies quite well, so he's probably more qualified to talk about that than me, but I will say that you're right. If it were indeed the case that there were some sort of, hidden agenda behind all this, and that they were utilizing those sorts of things to maintain contact with extra-dimensional or extraterrestrial intelligences, yeah, it would be interesting. It would be even more terrifying, I think, and for all we know, that could be what's going on. Again, I think that some of the more science-minded people out there, consider this sort of conversation that you and I are having right now crazy talk. They say this is just absurdity. There's no reason to even talk about this. And that's one reason I have to say, since you bring up reptilians, and I know our mutual friend Scotty Roberts is right now working on a book that deals with that pervasive presence of the reptilians in our midst, but that's one reason why he and I decided to do that Paradigm Symposium thing we're doing up in Minneapolis later this year, is that I think it's time to open whatever you believe, whether you believe in weirdness, whether you believe in conspiracies, how this all comes together. I don't profess to have the answers, Rita. I don't think Scotty does. Maybe you have a few more answers than us, but you also are psychic. So, I'm going to give you a.
Well, and I just make it all up anyway.
I'm sure that there will be people who would say that you do. That's just it. We each have our different perceptions of this and everything. And so, for instance, with something like Paradigm Symposium, the whole goal is to get the idea out there, and talk about it. And let's not be biased. Let's not stereotype one another. Let's just put it out there and let's have an open, honest debate about it. And really, even outside the scope of what you and I are talking about with regard to phenomenology and strange stuff, I think that should be the case with all aspects of culture. If we've got issues about politics, race, economics, and the potential economic collapse that we seem to be headed toward, when are we going to have a real honest dialogue about it and quit politicizing and quit throwing, shurikens at one another and everything, and playing this Hegelian dialectic against one another, where we get more people to fight about these things as opposed to solving the real problems and issues at hand.
So before you go back, give a pitch for the symposium, because you brought it up, but let's kind of just really put it out there. What is it? When is it? Who all's going to be there? Blah, blah, blah.
Sure. Well, the Paradigm Symposium is an event that Scotty Roberts of Intrepid Magazine and I are going to be hosting in Minneapolis, Minnesota, this October 18th through the 21st. And actually, we've got a website if people want to look it up. It's just paradigmsymposium.com. But, again, this is geared kind of around something that's been a hot topic on a lot of people's minds recently, and that is what I affectionately call paleocontact, the idea that in ancient times humankind may have been influenced by non-human intelligences. You can see that this, as opposed to, granted, it's more popularly known today as ancient astronaut or ancient alien theories. But, I think Carl Sagan may have been the one that I heard use the expression paleocontact, and I like that.
I like that, yeah.
I like that because, it refers to specifically, going back to prehistoric times, and, we don't know a lot about, mankind's early origins, and therefore it's only natural to see, people today speculating about what processes may have led humans, what could have been the catalyst that, shot us out of a cannon toward being the dominant species on this planet, So in trying to understand ourselves and our past, I think we can learn a lot about where we're headed and what our future is, which is why I've kind of coined this expression, reviewing our past and changing our future. That is what we do at Paradigm Symposium. That's why we've got some fantastic speakers that include Eric von Daniken, of course, author of Chariots of the Gods. And I know a lot of people have criticized von Daniken over the years, and, I, too, have looked at some of von Daniken's work myself and been like, I've seen where there's been, accusations that this evidence right here was falsified. This story was elaborated and embellished a little bit more. And von Daniken, what a lot of people aren't aware of is the fact that, although I think that at the center of his research, he is a very serious researcher, von Daniken, to an extent, is also sort of a satirist, I think, an American audience has a hard time looking at some of the subjects that von Daniken has brought to the table over the years. They've looked at them entirely seriously, and he has been asked, I know Playboy Magazine asked him back in the 1970s, were you entirely serious when you said this or that? And he said his answer was no, and I don't think a lot of people realize that. So while the general concepts that von Daniken with his research has, the general concepts he has tried to kind of present were intended to be taken seriously, he does it in a slightly tongue-in-cheek way, and has at times, yes, outright, and this maybe is a little questionable, but he is outright actually, according to many, it would be more than a little questionable. He's outright told, stories about, going into caves and finding relics and things, and a lot of this had been, really kind of fantasized. So, but I think at the end of the day, the reason that I remain interested in von Daniken is because he is a person who, as a writer, has managed to bring these concepts to a broad audience. And, again, I think some of the more staunch researchers out there, still really take issue with him. But, he should be credited for his ideas. He should be credited for bringing those ideas to the audience that he has, and for really, in the modern sense, culturally, being use that expression again, being the catalyst that really kind of got this whole ball rolling. But in addition to von Daniken, we've got George Norrie of Coast to Coast AM. My friend Philip Coppins, I mentioned, is going to be there, Scotty and I, and it's going to be geared toward examining our ancient past and some of the potentials that may exist there, and trying to take on a better understanding of really who we are, why we're here, and what we're intended to do as humans, as a civilization.
Well, I'm still waiting for one of your speakers to drop out so I can have a slot.
You need to be up there anyway. We'll work that out.
Okay. I mean, Scotty said the same thing, and I'm like, okay, so what does that really mean? All right, now I have it on air from two people. I'm going to use it for, blackmail,
That's right. Yeah, if nothing else works, blackmail them, then you'll get it.
Yeah.
But in all truth, it should be a fun time, and again,
no, it is going to be an awesome time. And I'll just put in my 2 cents. I mean, if anybody watches the ancient alien shows on TV, or a lot of the Discovery shows, you'll go, oh, I know him. George Norrie's going to be there. Ian Pundit's going to be there. It is one of those lineups that you can't even imagine getting all of these people all in the same room at the same time. It's an overwhelming lineup, in my opinion. So.
Well, thank you very much for that endorsement, because we certainly feel the same way, and hope sincerely that everyone out there will feel the same. And again, it's early out right now. I mean, this event isn't until October, but things are filling up pretty quickly in terms of guests and all that, and to the point that it can be quite stressful sometimes. In addition to writing books and doing all the stuff that I try and do daily, maintaining all the elements of planning and whatnot that go into putting on an event like this, and of the scope and breadth that this event is going to be. So, I still encourage people, while tickets are available, to check out ParadigmSymposium.com. This is definitely going to be one of those events you don't want to miss.
Well, and I'm just going to throw this out on air because I'm like Ms. Marketing Head. In addition to everything else, Ms. Marketing Head, you should plan on videotaping the sessions, because then you could sell them for people that can't make it. Hello.
Oh, well, that's part of the idea. We've got a lot of little surprises in store.
Ooh, all kinds of surprises. Yay.
Yeah, so it's going to be fun. Yeah, and there's going to be some, there's some little things that, Scotty and I have been planning with the event that, we haven't gone public with yet entirely, just because, we want to kind of, release some of this stuff as we go. And I can guarantee you that there's a lot of fun stuff, a lot of incredible activities that are going to be going on at Paradigm Symposium. That it's not just going to be your average show up and go listen to a guy talk for a couple of hours. This is going to be interactive. It's going to be a great time. And there's going to be a lot of unique activity going on, throughout the course of that event. So it's going to be quite unlike any event probably that I've ever attended, and probably unlike most other people out there have ever attended either. It's really going to be unique.
Oh, I have to throw this out. And Giorgio Zouklos is supposed to be there, so Ancient Aliens, the guy with the hair, everybody loves the guy with the hair, him, too. We get lots of comments in the chat room. Oh, Ancient Aliens, the guy with the hair. So the guy with the hair, him, too.
Well, I think there's 53 people who have signed up just to come see his hair alone. So that's pretty good. I don't know what percentage of the greater populace that would entail, but if people are coming just to see his hair, it's a shame that his hair can't sign autographs. But I hear Giorgio's hair has a Facebook like page, so that's kind of cool.
Oh, really? I'll have to go sign up for that one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So again, it's a small demographic out there that really are just in this to see Giorgio's hair, but that number exists.
Okay, so I'm looking at the clock. We have about 10 minutes. Any thoughts on what these beings might want with us? I mean, do you think they're trying to communicate with us? And if they are, how come?
That's a good question, because in the last question, I guess, prior to discussing Paradigm Symposium, we kind of talked about the potential in terms of what would people hope to gain from those kind of interactions with those entities. But, it's very seldom that you have an interaction between two parties in which one party is fine with just, essentially providing and not getting anything out of it for themselves. Wonderful. We give intelligence to humans and they walk all over us, or they use it to destroy themselves, whatever. And that knowledge, or rather that notion of the divine and holier than thou, all-knowing, all-kind, and all-loving space brother that really kind of became the archetype of the Adamski UFO contacts and things in the 1950s and into the 60s, before these little beady-eyed monsters start coming out of these saucers and start abducting people and doing all these horrific things to them. Boy, did things ever change. But anyway, it is hard to believe that if there were an alien intelligence behind any kind of interaction occurring between humans and non-human intelligences, that they would be all in it just like Adamski's, aliens had been, just basically trying to show love and help humankind. And therefore we're left with some potentially disturbing possibilities in terms of, well, what do they want then? If we're having these conversations, if these things are here, what do they want? There's always the assumption that humans are being strewn along under the belief that we're being given technology by an advanced race that wants to bring us to their level so that they won't be alone, which is kind of, it's funny, loneliness really is kind of the impetus behind, the spiritual interpretation along those lines of a God. I spoke with a man who, a medical oncologist who actually co-authored a book with Dr. Rick Strassman called Inner Paths to Outer Space. His name is Slavik Vojtovich. And talking with Slavik, who I interviewed for my book, Magic, Mysticism, and the Molecule, he told me that really in the beginning, if we take the approach to the God mythology, and again, I don't say that to offend anyone. I say that to be all-inclusive. I don't want to say I'm just speaking of a Christian God or anything else. I think that, just looking at the all-inclusive notion of there being a divine creator or an intelligent being above us who had a hand in the creation of life and reality as we know it, as Slavik put it, it was the beginning, and it was the loneliness and the thought of, being alone that compels God to create, as we, at least in the Christian Judeo-Christian tradition that we've referred to as in His own image. God made man in His own image. To combat that loneliness, to combat that sense of, well, here I am, and this is it. And now we have, humanity. Now we have life throughout the universe, and therefore I'm not alone. That's obviously kind of a metaphoric interpretation of that entire thing, and maybe isn't intended to be taken entirely literally. But if we were to apply that to the notion of aliens interacting with humankind, it could be that it's like, wow, here we are, and there's a potential among this civilization on Earth, to be like us. And if they are like us, we could grow and learn from one another. We could help one another along. How do you define friendship? When you're friends with someone, if it's a healthy friendship, you help one another, you grow and you learn from one another. You keep one another in good company and good spirits so that they don't feel the sadness of loneliness. It's the very same sort of thing. And so we could hope that if there were a benign reason behind, interaction between human and non-human intelligences, that it would be to try and do that. Even though humans may be less than us, we want to try and grow and learn from our interactions with them. And if people think that's unrealistic, well, I'll tell you, I've got a cat that, although she is not probably on the same level of know-how and knowledge that I am, I do grow and learn and enjoy wholeheartedly a lot of the interactions I have with my cat. So that certainly can happen between, two entities of varying levels of intelligence. By the same token, then again, that cat we would also call a prisoner. The cat does not realize that it is a prisoner because of the tame nature of its little reality, living in the house and being given food all the time, being supplanted with everything it needs. It doesn't think of itself as being held prisoner because it has everything it needs and it's never in want.
It's in the little Garden of Eden.
In the little Garden of Eden. You see the allegory there, the metaphor of once you have the knowledge, you start realizing that, I'm living in a little terrarium. I'm trapped. And as soon as you take the apple from the tree and bite it, reality comes to you, and then you're kicked out. And then you have freedom, all right. Boy, do you ever. But was it the freedom you really wanted? Nick Redfern, again, you can tell he and I have a lot of, unique conversations. He put it to me once like this. He said, think of the alien-human interaction kind of like a farmer and the cows that the farmer tends to. The farmer may, in a sense, be the cow's very best friend. He takes care of the cow. If the cow is sick, he doesn't want the cow to be sick. He's going to take the very best care of that cow. He's going to make sure that cow is big, fat, happy, and healthy until it's led to be slaughtered. So in a sense, the cow can be both the best friend of the farmer, or the farmer can be the best friend of the cow at least, and at the same time, it's also the death dealer, so to speak. What if that were the ongoing interaction that we were having with extraterrestrial intelligences? And what if we, although we didn't see it as such, we were, livestock in a sense? Or like Perry Farrell and his associates sang in the famous song, "We'd make great pets." Who knows? But it could be the case that, interdimensional intelligences or extraterrestrial intelligences would come looking for us to either enslave us or to make pets out of us or, to make, intergalactic livestock out of us. All of these things are potentials, and I'd like to think that it was a more optimistic scenario that I put forth earlier.
You mean not like the Matrix, where we're just like little batteries charging their universe?
That's a potential also. I mean, we don't know. We really don't know. So I think that we have to really consider all potentials. But I think it's interesting that while a lot of cosmologists are just fervent in their desire to damn it, we must make contact. And to quote William Shatner in his portrayal of Captain Kirk, risk, gentlemen, risk is our business. Well, yeah, it is, but if you lose out on the end of that risk, on the end of that gamble that you made, well, you may not be better for it. And so we have to keep Stephen Hawking's words in mind, not to be a naysayer or a sensationalist, or a fearmonger, but we could be opening Pandora's box by inviting these intelligences into our universe. Does that make it any less interesting, though, the potential for that having occurred or for that to occur? Heck no. I'm fascinated with it, and that, my friends, is why I wrote Magic, Mysticism, and the Molecule. It is a fascinating subject. And not all the potential, there it is, and I've put it out there in that book for people to consider for themselves.
So if people want to get a copy, where can they go to purchase one?
Well, you can find it on Amazon.com, and, of course, you can also get it right there at www.gralienreport.com. That's Gralien report.com. That's the website. And when people visit the Gralien Report, there's a lot of fun stuff. Not in addition to web podcasts that we put up each week, there are also a lot of articles and other interactive things there at the website, information about Paradigm Symposium. And, in fact, I have a link to your show right there front and center with a cool picture of me wearing a fedora on a windy city parking garage top. So it's kind of a neat film noir-esque kind of photograph there, and a link to your radio program. So people can check it out there, gralienreport.com.
Excellent. Well, I think the music's going to be coming up here in a second, so I just want to thank you for coming on the show. And I think you and I could just sit and talk for hours and hours and hours. But then again, me and Scotty could sit and talk for hours and hours and hours and hours.
Well, you know what, too, Rita? We should do that sometime, because during the course of this conversation, I haven't even been able to broach the subject with you of psychic stuff, which we talked a little bit one time about on my program. But, my life, I wouldn't say it's turning upside down, but I'm becoming more and more aware of the real potential for the existence of psychic phenomena. I'm not the kind of person who ever thought it would happen to me, and it's certainly happening more and more. I'm fascinated. Let's save it for another time, though, Hansa.
Okay, maybe we should have a phone call. Maybe it's all those drugs you're not doing that's opening you up to that possibility.
Oh, God.
Oops, sorry. Anyway, thanks again, Micah, and we'll talk. Sound good?
Thank you, Rita.
And we'll have you back on when it's getting closer to the show, but I will talk to you and Scotty about that, okay?
Fantastic. Anytime, my friend, you know how to reach me.
Okay, sounds good. That's Micah Hanks. His book is Magic, Mysticism, and the Molecule. His show coming up is Paradigm Symposium, and you can get information about the book and the show at gralienreport.com. That's Gralien report.com. And next week, who are we having on next week? Next week is Gotta Go. Talk to you next week. Bye-bye, guys.
Join host Dr. Rita Louise each